In this lecture, we're going to talk about sentiment analysis. Now, what we're going to do in this case with sentiment analysis, instead of trying to create a sentiment analyzer, we're going to make use of already created sentiment analyzers. And a lot of the sentiment analyzers that have been created to date have a lexicon derived from trained models. So they've already done a lot of the hard work in training some kind of machine learning tool. And we're going to apply that in order to be able to conduct some sentiment analysis. Now, what does this mean for our basic text analytics process? So typically, we go 1, establish the corpus; 2, pre-process text; 3, create a term document matrix; and then 4, extract information and knowledge. Now, keep in mind that in our case with sentiment analysis, step 4 is the extraction of the sentiment. But we don't need step 3. We do not need to create a term document matrix. And in most cases, not all cases, in most cases, you also don't need to pre-process your text. So you can almost go from establishing your corpus to extracting the information that you need, or in this case, sentiment. However, there is sometimes a need to pre-process your text to organize it and to prepare it for the sentiment analyzer. So I won't say you will absolutely not need steps 2, but step 2 would be a minimum type of process. All right, so sentiment analysis is a way of being able to assess people's opinions. Now, in this particular case, we can assess people's opinions that could give us what they feel about a specific topic. We could also find out whether they like or dislike a certain product, like with customer reviews, or in terms of politics or financial markets. We can also get an idea about what people are thinking. So there's a lot of applications where sentiment analysis can actually be used. Now, for our Python library today, we're going to be using TextBlob and also Vader Sentiment. Now, TextBlob has 2 dimensions. It has an objectivity dimension and then an effective position, or what we would consider the actual sentiment, being positive or negative. Now, the objectivity really helps us out a lot, because if someone is saying that, for example, a sports team performed poorly against their competitors, losing, by 10 points, that is somewhat of a factual statement, not necessarily a heavy opinionated statement. Really, the word poorly might have been opinionated, but overall, it is a fact-based statement, and so its subjectivity score would be rather low. However, its effective position might be on a negative side, but it won't have a lot of weight to it. That is a strength of TextBlob. Now with Vader's actually been trained on Twitter data. It's ideal for social media, and it has 4 measures. It has the percent of words that are positive, negative, and neutral, and then it has a valence score that is continuous from -1 to 1. Now Vader has been developed through computer scientists at Georgia Tech, and it's been quite strong at being able to handle social media type words such as emojis, NetSpeak capitalization, etc., etc. So let's take a look at each of these tools and then start to work with them. Now, before we get started, I want to share with you what is included in today's pack. I do have the model evaluation utility tool and the text normalizer that we've been using. The movie reviews are some data that we're going to evaluate. And if you look at the movie review data, you will see that one of the values is actually a positive or negative value that indicates whether a review was judged by humans as positive or negative. And we'll use the sentiment analyzer to test against this value to find out how accurate it really is. So we can use our model evaluation utility to do that. Now also, I've included some pickle files because there is some pickling required here, and that's just going to speed up the process that you need. But I've also left you with the code that you may want to use if you want to pickle the files on your own. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get our sentiment lecture running. By the way, for today, you're going to want to make sure that you have installed TextBlob and that you have also installed Vader Sentiment. So first we're going to use TextBlob, and I want you to take a look at these sentences. And what I'm talking about are these right here in lines 4 to 20. All right, what you can see, and if you need to pause to read them a little bit longer, go right ahead. But what you can see is that there is a comment at the end. It kind of gives you some information about each sentence and how it can be perceived. And we're going to go ahead and use text blob. So it's text blob, all one word. And that is going to be the tool that we're going to use to analyze these. Now, for every sentence in each of the sentences, this is how we get the text blob sentiment score. So that is just one line of code, and then we're going to print out that particular sentiment for that sentence. So for here, it is for sentence in sentences, and let's go ahead and execute it. Now, what I've done here is also make sure that we only get the sentiment score, but you can see that for the most part, a lot of them are greater than 0, except for this one, right? And also that we have some that are kind of neutral. All right. So take a look at these scores. If you need to pause it, feel free to do so. And kind of make an assessment in your head whether text blob has gauged the positivity or the negativity of each of these sentences as you might. All right, so thinking of text blob, this is kind of a small performance indicator as to how it is used. Now let's go ahead and do this with our movie data. Now what we're going to do with our data, it is in a CSV format. So we can just go read CSV and get our data. And I went ahead and put things in order for us. So you only need to execute that block just to make sure that movie review data is including, and we're going to call it a data set for now. So what we want to do is we want to run this loop, and basically it is a pre-contrived, and we want to get the sentiment score for all the reviews. We want the ID, and then we also want the sentiment of each of those particular movies. So we have the review, and then we have the sentiment, and let's just put this together. We're using text blob here in order to be able to run our sentiment analysis. Okay, so here's an example. Here's a review. It says, no comment, stupid movie, acting average or worse, screenplay, no sense, I'll skip it. And the actual sentiment was scored as negative from a human. And the predicted sentiment from text blob is at negative 0.3. So that works out pretty well. Let's take a look at the next one. I don't care if some people voted this movie to be bad, but if you want the truth, this is a very good movie. You can see that the actual sentiment was positive and that the predicted sentiment is a little bit better than neutral, so that it's on the positive side. Now let's take a look at this one. Now, if you look at the sarcasm in this particular review, worst horror movie, but funniest film ever rolled in one. Now you've got to see this film. It's so cheap, it is unbelievable. Right? But you have to see it. So people consider this to be a positive sentiment review, but text blob predicted it as negative. Now let's process all of our reviews. Now I have done a pickling of everything here, and I have made this a raw code. Okay, but if you wanted to actually run it, you can run it as code, and that is up to you. But for now, you can use my pickling. I have the sentiment polarity for this one, and we're just going to do a pickle load and then smart open, and we will get all of our sentiment polarity scores, and we're going to rate them. We're going to get the predicted sentiments that text blob has created, and we're going to score those using our model evaluation utility. And you can see, compared to human, that using an F1 score, text blob did about 76% correct. And if you look at the breakdown between positive and negative, we can see that it's about the same for both. So that tells us text blob could use a little improvement, but it's fair. All right, so let's do the same thing with Vader. Now Vader has a little bit different loading operation. what's really good about Vader is that, well, what's different about Vader, you don't use it in a single line. You have to initiate a sentiment intensity analyzer. Then you have to establish an analyzer object, and then you can use your Vader sentiment scoring. Now let's take a look at these sentences. These are the same sentences as before, except this time I replaced text blob with Vader. All right, so for every sentence in sentences, we're going to apply the analyzer, which we create here on line 24, for that sentence, and then we're going to print that particular Vader sentiment score. Now, I'll let you in on a little clue that these sentences were created by the makers of Vader. So I use them for both text blob as well as Vader, so we can have a little bit of comparison. Now, if you take a look at the compound score, this is going to be our best score for sentiment. Now, the negative is the percentage of words that it figures to be negative. Neutral is the number of words or the percentage of words that it assumes to be neutral. And positive is the number or the count of positive words. Now, if you look at the sum of all these, it should add up to 1. So the first one is a positive sentence, and you can see things like capitalization and exclamation and other superlatives that actually increase that positivity score. And what's interesting is that negation actually does affect the negative score. Now let's kind of take a look at text blob, and you can see when we look at text blob is not smart, handsome, or funny, we can see that ended up becoming positive, right? But in Vader sentiment, that one also became strongly negative, as it should have been. The plot was good, but the characters are uncompelling, and the dialogue is not great. Let's look at these. Today sucks, SUX. These are negative scores. Let's take a look at text blob where it came out. So notice that these came out either neutral or positive, right? So for little phrases that might be found in social media, you can see that text blob is not very strong. All right. So, and this makes sense because Vader was actually trained using Twitter data. And we could even see with these type of emoticons that Vader does a really good job with it. All right, here is a Vader sentiment tool. We're going to build a small lexicon tool here. And what this is going to end up doing is that we are going to look at the data. We're going to get rid of HTML tags, accented characters, and we're going to expand any contractions that might be in the movie reviews. All right. Notice we're not doing any lowercase. We're not getting rid of extra spaces, anything of that nature. Then we're going to apply the analyzer. We're going to get a score. We're going to get the compound score. And if that compound score is greater than a threshold value, we're going to consider it positive. If it's less than the threshold, it's negative, and otherwise it's going to be neutral. And in this case, our threshold is going to be 0.1, right? So the whole idea here is that if it is greater than 0.1, it's going to be positive. If it's going to be less than negative 0.1, and pay attention to that negative sign there, it'll be negative. So that means from negative 0.1 to positive 0.1, it's going to consider it to be neutral. And it's going to tag everything and then give us a sentiment score. Let's go ahead and make sure that block has been executed. So for every review and sentiment in the zipped item, we're going to get all the pieces. Let's go ahead and print this out. All right, so here's the same example. No comment, stupid movie. We can see that the review was negative and Vader predicted it as negative. Next one, the human predicted it as positive, but this time Vader predicted it as negative. And the last one, it really took the sarcasm a little better, and it also predicted it as positive. So you can see that there are still some flaws between the two. All right, So let's go ahead and evaluate Vader against our movie data set. I've already pre-pickled everything for you. So you could just go pickle load, smart open, and use the model evaluation tool, MEU, and get our performance. And you could see based on the large paragraph of the movie review data that Vader actually did a little bit worse than text blob. And it typically did worse in the area of negation. Okay, so what we can see here by this small test is you could see that Vader is really good at social media data, single lines, maybe a couple sentences of data. But in terms of paragraphs, text blob will do a better job, right? And that's based on our little experiment today. Perhaps you might run it through other data and then get some comparison. All right, so that is the sentiment analysis tools with our lecture today. If you have any questions, please reach out to me and I will see you in class. Thank you.